Assalamu alaikum, everyone. This is Ammaar bin Salim. Welcome to another episode of Outloud with Ammaar. This is season 4, and we're recording episode 7. Today, we have a very special conversation that we have brought for you. We're going to be talking about higher education, global higher education in Pakistan, and student enrollment. So this podcast is basically going to be very relevant for the ones who are working in international education, higher education enrollment. And I have just the right guest for it, who's joined me from the US, Megan Mankerian-Stem. Megan has extensive experience of working not only in the US, but of course, traveling and all those things as well. So she understands the market, the global market very well. She is a graduate of Valparaiso University, worked there as well in international enrollment, then worked at Creighton University, currently working as program manager at Coursera, and is also the founder of Global Leaders Collective. So Megan, thank you very much for joining us today at Out Loud.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure, of course. So, as we were discussing, you've been to Pakistan many times. When was the last time that you were here in Pakistan?
So I think the last time was right as the world was shutting down for the pandemic. I remember I was in Dubai, the news started to come out that something was happening. And I go to fly into, I want to say I flew into Islamabad or Lahore. And I remember
Right.
getting off the plane and we were all getting our temperatures taken, but nobody really knew what to do. We went on with our business. I think I was there for about a week and then flew home and then everything shut down. So that would have been the very end of February 2020.
February 2020. Exactly. The world changed right away at that time, and I'm kind of wondering because as to how you guys would have managed coming to Pakistan. With all that news coming in and everything, but still, at least it was China where it had started. It wasn't Pakistan.
Yeah, I think that was our exact thought process. Was in the moment, it was pretty like still localized to China and maybe a little bit of East Asia. So we felt relatively safe. We also knew that, Pakistan's not a tourist destination per se. So we knew that there's not a lot of travel happening in and out of the country. So we just
If you
felt
had
like it was.
said the same statement to our prime minister back then, he would have been hurt very badly, honestly. He was the one who was working extensively on
I
tourism
know. And
development.
that said, like Pakistan is a beautiful place to go. Like I highly recommend it to people.
I just wanted to bring
Um,
you to that.
but there's also, of course, as we know, so much misinformation that exists in the world about not just Pakistan, but so much of the Middle East and Central
Yeah.
Asia that
That's
that
that,
we
and that is
were
also
to
true. That it's of course the footfall of our international travelers is not as much as it should be, and I hope the current government is also working on that. But yeah, you're right. You're right. Point well noted. So what's your finest memory of being in Pakistan?
I mean, one thing that I always rave about, I guess there's two things. One is the food. Whenever I tell anybody who's going for their first time, I say bring stretchy pants and like bigger clothes because you will gain at least 2 to 3 kg while you're there. Because
Oh,
the food is
absolutely.
so good. And then the other thing is just the people. Like Pakistani people are the most hospitable. And like, there's never a moment that I'm like walking around shopping or doing anything where I ever have felt like unsafe or unwelcomed, and always appreciate people who just want to like come up and have a conversation and ask, like, where are you from?
That
Why are
is
you
Pakistan.
here? And just want to get to know people. And it's just something that I love about visiting.
I'm sure, absolutely. Yeah, this is something that we also try and explain to our friends who've not yet visited to Pakistan. Whenever we go outside of Pakistan, we let them know that Pakistan is a country that you should come and visit and see for yourself. It is a lot of beauty in terms of the natural beauty, and it is all a lot of the environment on the whole is quite hospitable. So the next time you are here, as we had committed, I'm gonna take you and I'm gonna make enjoy some biryani in Lahore.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, right. So you've been working in the higher education enrollment marketing. So how do you see that as a career, by the way?
So it's interesting because so many people who work in this field, we didn't know this field existed when we were studying in university. Most
Yeah.
of us just kind of fell into it one way or another. So for me, when I was a student at Valparaiso, I worked very closely with the International Student Services Office with all of the international students. I was very involved in the International Student Organization and was vice president and president.
Hmm.
And through building those connections, when I graduated at Valpo, there was an opening in the provost's office to do essentially international relations. And the
Right.
director of the International Student Services Office called me up and he was like, Megan, you need to take this job and come be in this field. And so I did, still not really knowing what all this field had to offer. Because most people think, okay, student services, working with the current students at the university or
Yeah.
study abroad. I had no idea that actually getting to travel around the world, working with families, from over 110 countries, uh, was a thing that I could do. Um, and I love it. So I just kind of fell into it. My first ever recruitment trip was actually to Iraq,
Wow.
which is not something that a lot of people would say. Most people's first trip is usually like India or China or maybe Latin America. No,
Yeah.
for me, I was right into Iraq and
And this
Dubai.
was
So
back then when?
this was back in 2011, 2012.
Right. Oh my God.
Yeah. And since then, I've really just become incredibly passionate about this field. And so I'm incredibly involved in many organizations, do a lot of training with school counselors and independent counselors,
Yeah.
and still work with families around the world on trying to decipher, not just what university to go to, but what are the pros and cons of each country that they're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting, being 13 years into this industry, just how much it's completely changed from what it was 13 years ago to what the industry is today.
Hmm. So, what are some of the major changes that that you say you have seen in the in enrollment marketing in as far as the global landscape is concerned?
I think the biggest thing is that there's more opportunities for students than ever before,
Hmm.
which from a student perspective is great. So, for example, a student from Pakistan no longer has to look only at like the US or the UK. There's so many opportunities throughout Europe now. There's so many opportunities in Hong Kong or Australia or
Yeah.
even in the Gulf with the number of universities that have opened up branch campuses in Doha and Dubai. Uh,
Yeah.
and so students, which is great from a student perspective in many ways, it could get a little confusing in weighing those pros and cons. From a university perspective, though, it does mean that it's more competitive than ever
It's more
before
competitive.
to
Absolutely.
recruit international students.
Yeah, because it's not easy anymore. And it's again, as you have mentioned, there's so many universities, there's so many destinations now. It used to be very different, as you have mentioned, like a decade ago. Students would want to go to a certain select universities and nowhere else. They would be so hell bent on that, and there would be certain destinations that would be the preferred or the only destinations they'd want to study in. And now the whole wide world has changed. So yes, we see, at least in Pakistan, we see students going to Germany. We see students going to Scandinavian countries. UK is a very popular destination for Pakistani students. So much so that Central Asian countries as well. We do see that change, and that also means that there are so many universities bringing in a lot of competition as well. So you have to be on top of everything else. And whereas this is one thing that competition enhances quality, it's also the competition also enhances stress on the people working at
Yes.
all these organizations. Bringing in the number, bringing in the students is a huge matter of concern.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing, we think of education as being a sector where it's student serving, and we,
Mm,
of course, want to make sure students are getting the best education and the best opportunities possible. But
yeah.
education is also a business at the end of the day. And so, uh, like working at a university and doing recruitment for universities is a business. There's a lot of discussions about
Hmm.
budgets and ROI and data and tracking data and using
Hmm.
technology. And it's all incredibly important. And sometimes it's difficult to find that balance of, well, are we, yes, we want to bring in international students. Yes, we want to have a healthy student population on our campus. But are we also equipped to make sure that we're still offering the best education and the best student services that we can for everybody?
Exactly, exactly. And that is a major concern, absolutely. And especially if I see the same situation in the context of Pakistan, the things have changed in the sense that, our currency has depreciated. So if somebody is trying to go to a different country, or let's say somebody aspires to go to the US, everything will have to be converted into the US dollars. And then that means that it's going to cost you a huge amount of money in Pakistan for somebody to send their kid to a US university. And if you're going to a private university, of course, that's going to cost you a fortune. So yes, absolutely. The landscape is changing. The competition is increasing. People now look at all these factors, the data, ROI, the way we're approaching the market, the creative, so much so the creatives, the media buying, all these things. So, and it's very fascinating at the same time, because I mean, the organization that I was previously working at was a brand that was known nationwide. I mean, would be, I'm not sure it would be right to say, but at least it kind of enjoyed the reputation that Harvard enjoys in the US. So that organization enjoyed pretty much the same reputation, at least in Pakistan, in the context of the country. So the marketing used to be very different. And now that I've joined a different organization, so then you become way more aggressive. Then you do explore new ways of reaching out to where your market would be, where your audience would be, and that's also quite fascinating. Especially if I look at the situation with my own perspective, it's very fascinating in terms of what you learn as a marketer. Then when you see that all these universities, and there are so many fairs that take place across the globe, how do you see the perception that the US university enjoys as compared to the perception that a non-US university would enjoy at an education fair, let's say?
I think right now this is such an interesting discussion. I mean, even if we just purely look at politics in America right now, that nobody knows what's going to happen here in the next 5 or 6 months. And it's a gamble either way, really. And so it's interesting traveling to different parts of the world right now. And some parts of the world care about the American elections and some don't. Uh, but it's always having to be prepared to be kind of in that diplomatic state
Hmm.
where, like, yes, not only are you selling your institution, yes, not only are you talking about which A levels will transfer in and how does that work and what A levels should you be taking, but also being prepared for parents to ask questions about politics and having that diplomatic answer, or being able to talk to parents about safety in America right now. This is a
Hmm.
big conversation. Uh, and I completely understand and empathize with parents having a major concerns about this. They're sending their child halfway across the world, and they want to make sure that their child is going to be safe,
Hmm.
and going to receive the education that they're paying for. But at the same time, nobody can guarantee anybody's safety. And so it's interesting. Like, again, when we think about the layers of education and the layers of this role, it's also so many moments of just having to be like a diplomat to the US.
Yes, absolutely. You have to be,
And
if you have, especially if you're in
yeah,
international marketing, you have to be a diplomat of the country.
yeah. And you're always just have to be like on your toes and prepared for any type of question and any type of answer. And sometimes it is that comparison where parents will say, but this is what's happening, in Canada. Is it going to happen in the
Mm.
US? We have to say, well, we're very different countries with very different leadership. So what's happening in Canada, for example, like in India this past year with the visa concerns and their diplomatic issues, which now have turned into larger visa concerns in Canada. We have to say, well, we don't necessarily think something like that's going to happen in the US. But then again,
Mm.
that's a difficult thing to say in Pakistan, where we also know getting a visa is difficult in
Yeah.
Pakistan for the US. And and so you always have to be very hyper aware of what's happening.
Hmm.
And this is something that also becomes a struggle on campuses, where those of us who work in international enrollment and admissions, we are always trying to fight. It's like I always call it a constant chess game where not only are we always having to explain like the data, the ROI, the budget, but also how different geopolitical issues are affecting all of
Yeah.
these numbers. They're things that are out of our control. And like I said, always just having to be hyper aware of every little thing happening in the world. So not only can we explain that on campus, but then when we're out traveling, we're also just prepared to answer questions.
Absolutely. No, that happens a lot. So whenever I have traveled out of Pakistan to market my institution, I have seen a lot of, I have experienced this where you have to be a diplomat of your country, where you have to be the best, the embodiment of the best Pakistani citizen, to kind of convince and kind of break the stereotypes associated with Pakistan. And I absolutely get it. There was this one instance I distinctly remember. It's not something that I'm proud of, but it's an experience that I have, gone through. I guess I was in Istanbul at a university, and we had put up our stall. And the university, as I mentioned, is great in Pakistan, but outside of the country, not many people would know of that university and something that associates with Pakistan. On the whole, the appetite isn't really that strong. So then I had, because there weren't many people who had visited my stall, I had to go from table to table, because we had set up in a cafe all the universities. So I had to go and meet the students on their tables while they were eating, to kind of explain. And that's how, I mean, that is the pressure that you take, and that is also, somehow reflective of the responsibility you feel is on your shoulders when you're representing not only not only the your organization, but also the country.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, my concern, of course, going forward is depending on the elections this year in America, like
Today we have a
having,
debate. I think it's only 10 hours from
yes,
now.
yes, later this evening, it's the first debate of the series. And having, worked through the Trump era, and especially when waking up every day and never sure, like, what did he tweet overnight or what did he say overnight? So, for example, waking up to the news of the Muslim ban and trying to quickly navigate, like, what does this
Hmm.
actually mean? Is it just
Hmm.
words he's saying? Is this something, that's going to have an impact on our current students? Does it have an impact on where I'm traveling and
Hmm.
recruiting? But then again, just another layer of being prepared to be a diplomat, to say, okay, this is a president who says whatever comes to his mind with no filter. But just because he says that, what's happening at universities is a very different
Yeah.
conversation, a very different world. And we have our own, culture, our own beliefs, our own way of doing things that are not necessarily reflective of what the national government is saying. And so sometimes, like, having that conversation with parents to be like, yeah, we have this president, he says whatever, but essentially just ignore it.
Yeah, it's not a very hard thought, because we've all had presidents and prime ministers and political leaders say all sort of things. It's things like those coming from Trump was a surprise, though, at first, but not anymore. But
Yeah, but still exhausting.
I'm sure. Yeah, especially when you're representing the country and you're
Yeah.
enrolling and you're convincing people into sending their kids to your university, the situation changes pretty much like this. So this
Yeah.
brings me down to my next question. So what is like you go and I mean, marketers go and they present at universities, they present at colleges, and they set up booths and all those things. And students also ask all sorts of questions. So, what is that one hard question, or the hardest of all questions that you have, or the situations that you've ever faced?
Oh, I think that's a tough question. Although I will say one tough question. It's not necessarily a tough question. It's sometimes just tough getting students to wrap their mind around this. Is always that question coming out of the pandemic of, well, what SAT score do I need to get admitted? Or do I need to take the SAT? And trying to explain that, like, you actually don't even have to take it if you don't want to. Most universities in the US are test optional or test blind when it comes to the SAT, but especially in South Asia, the culture growing up has always been around testing and
Yeah,
education.
absolutely. It
Like you're
is.
always preparing for the next exam. And it doesn't matter if you're in the national curriculum, you're in A levels, you're in IB, like it's always exam driven. And like even to go to universities in most countries, it's you take an exam to get into
Mm,
that university, right? And so to try to tell students, actually, this exam doesn't matter and you don't really need to take it. And they're like, but I do, ma'am. So what score do I need? And it's trying to like break down some of these barriers to just get them to understand that first, you are more than just a test score. SAT score shows me, did you wake up on a Saturday morning and did you drink coffee before this exam? Uh, but to explain like the holistic model of US admissions, that your grades are important, yes. If you have a test score, okay, we look at it. But your essays and your extracurricular activities are all equally as important because you are a whole person. You are not just a grade.
this is what I used to tell when I would go for presentations. I'm surprised that you have faced similar situations where students would just ask you, what would be the best SAT score that's going to get me into the university? And I'd be like, oh yeah, this is the average that we have been seeing. And if you get past this, the chances are bright. No, but what's the exact score I need to have? Like, there
But
is no
what's right,
exact
exactly. But
score.
what's the number?
Yeah, but what's the number? Yeah, what's the number? And then I go on. It's not just this. It's also your application, your recommendation letters, who you are as a person, your whole profile, community service, all those things. And then they'd still be like, no, but what are the grades and what's the SAT score I need to have? And like, oh my God. But this is also the situation that we have gone through. Where I do feel that it is a bit of a surprise for me to make them understand that we evaluate the applications holistically. I can also see from their standpoint because I've also gone through the same that we have a lot of emphasis in South Asian countries on testing and being adequately testing the exams should be. And so for one reason or another, I think this is one of the biggest reasons that why we see a lot of students facing a lot of stress as well. Because I mean, tests do bring out the stress in you,
Yes.
increase the stress levels in you.
Yeah. And this is one of the things and part of why I started my company. And I do recruitment with universities different than most other organizations or big fairs or things like that, because we need to shift and think about this education model because we know
Mhm.
that mental health is a rapidly growing topic coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And even as I read essays for universities for applications, the number of students who are talking about mental health now is much greater than it ever has been. So, in turn, when I'm bringing a group of universities to a high school, especially when we're talking to parents, it's how can we actually educate them to start
Hmm.
making some of these shifts in the thinking? Because at the end of the day, this is a cultural shift that we're trying to make when it comes to things like testing or
Hmm.
talking about mental health or even higher education as a whole, getting out of the rankings
Yeah.
conversation and some of
Yeah.
those. And so it's how can we come in and instead of just setting up a table and giving brochures and answering the basic questions of what SAT score do we need, it's how can we take a step back and actually have better conversations with students and parents and counselors to really talk about what is important and
Hmm.
why is it important
Hmm.
and what is it actually that we're looking for in an application or what are questions that you should be asking universities instead of, the SAT
Yeah,
question.
absolutely.
And I find that having these conversations and having like these educational moments then lead to these students and parents and counselors asking universities better questions and feeling
True.
more equipped to build a better list for their applications.
True.
And at the end of the day, that's what I want. I want students and parents to feel confident in the list that they're making and to feel confident that they have the necessary information and tools to make these decisions.
Exactly. Exactly, absolutely. Because it's a long commitment. So 3 to 4 years, generally, the students we have seen who are interested in international education are the ones who are done with their A levels or their 12 standards. So the next part of the next step in their academic journey is a 4 year bachelor's program. So it's a big commitment with any university. It's also a huge commitment in terms of finances, in terms of your efforts, being away from your family, and of course if somebody decides to not come back and stay in the country that they're going for further education or go on ahead from there. So again, it's a big life decision as well. So students also, I feel, in this equation, students and parents need to be asking better questions rather than being desperate about getting into universities. And yeah, so more education and awareness is pivotal in this journey. And I also believe that as marketers and as school college counselors, it is significant that we not just market the brand that we are representing, but also first take into account the unique aspects of that applicant, and then see if a relevant program is with us or not. Because if it is not, then it's better to suggest a different university to a student, because we're also human beings and we're not just marketers trying to bring in the right amount of revenue.
Yes, and this is a lot of the training that I do with universities before we even leave, our homes to go out and recruit and go on these tours and meet with, high schools and students and families, where I say, okay, let's figure out how we can actually work as a team versus this very individualistic mindset to say, like, if a student comes up to you and asks for engineering and you don't have engineering, like, it's okay to say, I don't have engineering. However, my friend over here actually has these great engineering programs if you're
Yeah,
looking for civil and mechanical, or my friend over here has great aeronautical programs.
yeah,
Um, or if a student comes up and asks for biology, we know most universities have biology, but it's okay. But if that student, like, asking the further questions, if they're looking for marine biology, for example,
mm,
there's actually only a handful of universities in the US that has marine biology.
mm,
And so it's really, you know, equipping universities with that thought process of, don't just go in with the thought, to sell your institution at any cost. It's, how do we also make sure that you're connecting with the right students who are, have the potential to enroll,
yeah.
instead of just telling them what they want to hear. And like I said, and really working as a team, because at the end of the day, if students then feel supported by the group and the counselors are happy and the parents are happy, it means we're going to be invited back to come again and to do more with
Absolutely.
these students. And that's what we want at the end of the day, because again, that goes back to helping a university get their ROI.
Exactly, and I feel that many universities struggle with this. So sometimes they feel so high and mighty, that there comes into equation this distance between the university's marketer and the counselors at these colleges and schools, and whoever the decision maker is, and who are the ones who are actually going to let you have an interaction with the student, that they don't let you come in. So for
Yes.
them, or for university marketers to be successful, I think it's important for them not only to be focused on the university's programs, but also, as we have agreed, on the best fit for the students, but also ensuring that the right vibes go off as well. Of you being honest, of you being trustworthy, of you being being somebody who is just suggesting the right programs, if they have it or not.
Yes. And this is a conversation that I also keep having, not with just counselors, but also high school leadership, because
Mm,
it's also interesting. A trend that we're seeing is that, a group of universities, or I will reach out to a counselor, and the first comment back will be, well, what universities are coming? And all they care about is the reputation. Like, is it a big name university? Is it a highly
mm,
ranked university? Instead of
mm,
thinking, oh, but actually, are these universities a good fit? Take out the rankings, right? And
mm,
so even for example, this fall, I'm putting together a big event in Mumbai with principals from throughout the city to talk about breaking down the barrier of the thought process of rankings
Hmm.
and just having a big name to say, okay, but if we think about Harvard, for example, or Berkeley, yes, are they a highly ranked, well known institution? Absolutely. But they don't give scholarships or financial aid to international
Hmm.
students. So unless a family is prepared to pay close to $100,000 a year,
Yeah.
uh, that's hurdle number one. Number two, the admission rate for these institutions is below 3% at this point. So it's literally a lottery system of who's even getting admitted. So the chances of your student getting admitted, incredibly low. However, I'm happy to bring you a group of universities that are well priced, that your families can afford, or offer large scholarships for your students.
Hmm.
So it makes it, in a price range that's doable for families that are well regarded institutions with amazing programs that have really cool research opportunities, connections to awesome internships. You just may not have heard of this university before, but just because you don't know the name doesn't mean that they're not a good fit for your families and your
Hmm.
students. And so really now thinking about how can we continue to have these types of conversations with counselors and principals to also get out of this same thought process of, oh, if it's not a highly ranked or well-known institution, it's not worth our students' time.
Yeah. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, not every student is going to go to a college or a university like Harvard or Cambridge or, in Pakistan, it would be LAMS or, but because there are other universities as well. And I do see, because since I worked at different organizations, I do see that many of these professors who are teaching at one university that might be the best, considered the best in a certain country, they would also be teaching or might have taught in the past and one course or two courses at a different university that wouldn't rank as number one in that country. So you see, and I always ask my question. I always ask this to myself: if the quality in that teaching is going to be different or not. But I don't think that happens. The quality of the management or the services that the university provides would for sure be different. There's supposed to be a difference, of course, I guess. But the teacher, when the teachers are the same, the quality of instruction I feel is more or less the same.
Yeah. Like it's always interesting. In my last university that I was a director at was such a great example that outside of the US and even the Midwest region, not many people have heard of Creighton University.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I start challenging people and say, okay, but the city we're located in, which is where I still live today, we're a top city in the world for Fortune 500 companies. We have the lowest unemployment rate in the US. We are the number one city for both college grads and millennials to get jobs. And a lot of them are at Fortune 500 companies. We have more millionaires per capita than any other city in the US. The cost of living is one of the lowest still in the country. We're also the number two foodie city in the country, which is just a fun side
That
note
resonates with
that you
Lahore.
have here, get a great job, but also eat great food. But when they start to hear these things, oh, and the university itself had a 99% rate of their students getting jobs within 6 months of graduation.
Hmm.
99%.
It's
And when
remarkable.
they start to think about all of those points, they're like, oh, it was like, and I have scholarships. So why wouldn't you want to consider a university like this?
And that's a whole, spin to the narrative that a marketer establishes for their program or for their university. I mean, yeah, if the university is not well known or if the city is not that well known, that maybe, you could bank on the city, and that's a new idea for me as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it was always funny to see their faces to be like, oh, what is the city? I'm like Omaha, Nebraska, like the best city you've never heard of.
The
Just
best city that you
fine.
never.
That's why I'm here.
So yeah, then again, it for marketers and for people who are interacting with international audiences, or even the ones who are living in your country but are not as aware of the city that you have your organization in, it's important for you to be, as a marketer, to be updated in terms of, what the economy looks like, what the people look like, what the, what the job market is like, what the political scenarios are like. So absolutely very on point. And also now that, I mean, it brings me down to my next question. You have traveled across multiple countries and multiple regions, of course. So as somebody who has a very successful career in enrollment marketing, which region would you say is the best in terms of, emerging markets for university students or university enrollment?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough question right now. And I think the question that everybody's trying to figure out, like the American mindset is that, pre-pandemic, China was the number one sender of students to America. And so a lot
Mm-hmm.
of universities are still stuck in this mindset where they're like, oh, we need to be going back to China. That's where we need to be recruiting. And I say, actually, no. I don't think the China numbers are going to come back like they were pre-pandemic. Do I think you could still go and it could be a good mix in your
Mm-hmm.
enrollment plan overall, in your strategy? Yes. But do I think that that's where you should be focusing or assuming that your numbers are coming from? Absolutely not. So the next question is like, okay, well, India, that's the next biggest sender right now. I said,
Because
okay, you're
it
not
has a
wrong.
huge population.
Yes, correct. But they have a huge population. And when you break down the numbers, still the majority of students from India are graduate students. So if
Mm-hmm.
that's the population you're looking for, great. But if you're looking to recruit undergraduate students, do I think India again has potential? Has a place in your marketing? Absolutely. Do I think you should be
Mm-hmm.
there? Yes. But if you think that that's where you're going to get all of your students, that's not it. But to answer the question then of, okay, but then what is it? What is the golden ticket here? I
Yeah.
say there actually isn't one anymore. And we have to get out of this mindset that there's going to be one country that's going to send you all of these students.
Mm-hmm.
It's really now looking at how do you build a quality mix of the students that are coming in and reaching the right students. There are places, and I think Pakistan's a great example. There is a huge growing number of high school students in Pakistan. And we also know
Yeah.
that the middle class is a growing
Mm-hmm.
sector in Pakistan. So families have a little bit more money and affordability to go abroad. And so I think it is a market that universities need to be at and to seriously consider and to start getting over this thought process of, oh, but it's not a safe place to go or all of these other barriers, because it's simply not true. I do think one of the biggest questions or one of the biggest things that universities need to be aware of is that, yes, you can have these amazing conversations with Pakistani students. You can get these great applications and admit students. The visa situation is still a hurdle. And it's something that's completely out of our control. As many times as we try to have conversations with the consulate or the visa officers to say that, uh, like one example I hear sometimes is a visa officer, if a student has taken the IELTS and not the TOEFL, they don't think that they're a real student. And I'm like, but they took a test and their English is great. So, and
Yeah.
it's a legitimate test, right? Plus, the university has admitted it. The university has already done the background checking
Mm-hmm.
on those test scores to know that they are legitimate, that the student
Yeah.
is legitimate. Or like another one is if a student takes Duolingo instead of TOEFL or IELTS, they're like, but that's not as big as the other two. I'm like, but you also don't come from an academic background to even understand what some of these exams are. Or the students who don't take the SAT and the visa officer will be like, well, you're not a serious student because you didn't take the SAT. To be like, 98% of universities don't require it.
Yeah.
So it's not a necessity anymore. And so, but of course, one of the challenges is the visa officers change every 3 years. So then you have to start the
Mm.
process over. And we're seeing this not just in Pakistan, it happens in other countries. And, it's how do we help educate them to also trust a university and their admissions decisions?
Yeah.
Let the consulate and the visa officers do their role. Of course, they have a role of making sure a student's going to be legitimate, but the rate of denials in Pakistan is concerning compared to other countries, which is unfortunate.
Exactly. Yeah, as we were discussing in the beginning, that you might have the best students in Pakistan, but again, the political situation and the way the country has been so negatively branded, it does create a lot of problems for the people who want to go and study outside Pakistan. And yeah, visa is always a big challenge for Pakistani people, because even if you're planning out a trip that is a personal one, or let's say if it's an official if it's a conference that you have to go to, you're still not sure till the end if you're going to get the visa or not. So it is a big concern. I really feel that the universities in the US and the universities in the UK maybe they need to be working very closely with all these diplomatic missions that get established at all these countries where the visa processing has historically remained challenging. Because again, we understand that filing a visa and then going through the applications and doing everything, it already costs you a lot of money as a student in Pakistan. And once you get there and you get a rejection when you're absolutely certain that you have secured a seat at one of the best universities in the US, it does cause you heartbreak, and it does cause you a change in the plans. So yeah, absolutely, point well taken. And just my last question. So there's a lot of debate going on in this day and age that we see, and this is with regards to the relevance of a university's degree program, 3 to 4 years, in a world where we are increasingly becoming AI focused, and with the onset of AI, everything has become so uncertain if the jobs that we are doing today are going to stay relevant, or if we should be going for university education, or should we be focusing on AI related skills that could lend us better jobs and could and have more you know um, job prospects. So how do you see the situation on that end?
Yeah, I think this is a very important topic, and one that I coach students and parents to be pressing universities on, to say, don't just stop with the questions of, do you have computer science, or do you have, computer engineering? You need to ask, what are you doing in those programs, to constantly make sure that the
Yeah.
coursework and the relevant opportunities are changing with what's happening. Because the reality is especially for students who are looking at engineering and technology and even business, the first job that they're going to have after they graduate from a university likely does not exist today,
Yeah.
because of how quickly things are changing, because of AI, because of whatever the next AI is going to be, right? We know it's right
Hmm.
around the corner. So we need to be pushing universities to answer these questions, to make sure that they're also keeping this in mind. I know from the university perspective, there's also a lot of conversations about making sure that courses stay updated and have the relevant information. And it's interesting that this also lends into some of the work I'm doing with Coursera, where Coursera partners with companies like Microsoft, Google, Meta
Yeah,
to offer
they do.
certificates. And so, like, even talking to students who are like, well, what should I be doing in the summer, to raise my profile? And I say, actually, why don't you look at one of these Coursera
Yeah.
certificates? Like, if you could do this UX design or a full stack program that, includes Gen AI into these certificates, it's already going to put you ahead of a lot of other students just to have some of this background knowledge, but also helps you with this upskilling education and background info.
I also feel that platforms like edtech platforms like Coursera, Udemy, they're also posing a lot of challenge for universities recruitment officers, because you can study pretty much the same courses sitting in your own country, enjoying the comfort of your bedroom. So of course then you're definitely missing out on the experience of being in a university and experiencing firsthand all those things that a university student experiences, for sure. But at the same time, the professors are pretty much the same. The degree that you're getting is pretty much the same, and it's a lot of actual technical skill learning that can happen, that I feel doesn't always happen in a university's classroom. Universities classrooms are great for I feel for personality development, for thinking, for your communication skills, because it's not easy to get these skills from a course on Coursera or from Udemy. That's what I personally believe. And for those things, you have to go to a university. But yeah, I think edtech platforms are also a great way of learning and staying abreast of the rest of the world and the students. So,
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think there's a place for both.
yeah.
And I think again, sometimes it goes back to this question, like it doesn't have to be one or the other. It doesn't have to be a competition. Excuse me, but how can like a university and a Udemy or a Coursera work together better to be able to offer both? And again, I think this goes back to students also making these demands to say, like, this is what we need, this is what I want. Because sometimes I think universities can be very stuck in their ways of what just
Mm,
traditional education looks like. And I think the pandemic tested this, right? Trying to move everything to a remote environment, but then how quickly everything just shifted right back. And even as I asked questions to say, okay, but if we know that students are capable of learning online, if we know that students overseas are also being very cost conscious, why aren't we doing a better job now of, as we come out of the pandemic, creating hybrid opportunities where maybe
mm,
well, a 2-year master's program, if a student can do the first year remotely from their home country, come to, the US for their second year,
yeah,
that gives them, the opportunity then to be in the US long enough to qualify for OPT, to have the in-person skills, the ability to work with a career services office, to look at internship opportunities,
yeah,
but also meet students where they're at and families where they're at right now.
absolutely.
And so I think, again, this is a little bit of the challenge that US higher ed is having in kind of this renaissance that needs to happen as universities are trying to grapple with what is traditional education? Does it still make sense? Where are they lacking in numbers? And of course, lacking in enrollment means lacking in budgets and money, and how can they do better at figuring out what students actually want and need today?
Exactly, exactly. It does come down to how the world is and how students take it and what matters to them. And of course, what matters to, or what the employers value at the end of the day in the students that they're going to be hiring in their companies. So yeah, well, thank you very much, Megan. I just love the conversation so much. We were able to talk not only on higher education, but also on higher education in the context of Pakistan, and then also discuss the students and the emerging markets, to which you gave a very diplomatic answer. But that is also the best answer that anybody could give. So once again, very, very grateful for your presence at Outloud with Amar, and I hope we'll have a chance to interact very soon, and then do another session that would be an in-person session.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. So you've been to Pakistan many times. I can see that, and you're maybe
Yes.
interacting with a lot of Pakistani people. So once again, very grateful, and to my audience, we'll soon be bringing you another conversation on higher education. Just stay tuned to Outloud with Amar. Take care.